We now welcome Jim Hammer, who's a former San Francisco prosecutor, and I was studying for the priesthood. You know, when I heard that, I tried to figure out how you balance the whole idea of compassion with the idea of crime and punishment. You know, I mean,
right.
How do you do that?
Well, you know, most people see prosecutors, if you watch Law and Order or something on TV, is you know, men and women out just throwing people in prison. But for me, the most powerful part of being a prosecutor, it's the part you wouldn't see on TV, is sitting with a victim's mother. I did mostly murder cases here in San Francisco, and especially poor folks, you know, who otherwise don't get much attention from society. Sitting with a poor mother from the inner city, let's say, whose kid was murdered, and saying, you know what, I promise you, I'm going to put my heart and soul into this, and I'm going to do my best to bring you justice. To show that mother over the next year or two justice, to bring it to a conviction and let her know that her kid was just as valuable as any rich kid, any white kid, anything else.
It's like half full, half empty. You're sitting there with the victim's mother.
It's never.
Someone else could be sitting with the accused mother, and they'll say, well, he came from these conditions, social conditions, economic conditions.
Quick story. Believe me, in the courthouse, I was a tiger, and I really took people apart on the stand. But having said that, I never hated the defendant. And one of the most powerful moments I ever saw as a prosecutor is a victim's mother, you know, of a young boy, Seth Woods, who was stomped to death and sodomized. After I convicted the killer, the victim's mother and the defendant's mother made peace in the hallway. So even out of all that, there was still some humanity in the whole thing. But it's a lot of suffering, Art.
So this whole thing about crime and punishment, you have to have punishment, you have to have enforcement. I, as we talked about, am so frustrated that while the city's progressives or the city's yuppies or the business people are moving along on their paths, in the meantime, we're headed towards a record homicide and violent crime rate. The streets are lawless, and the word is out. Isn't it true that if you're a drug dealer, the policy is you can't be arrested except after the third time, and they're coming in from around the Bay Area to do their drugs here?
Listen, I left the DA's office 2.5 years ago when my boss lost, and I was loyal to him. And I've stayed out of politics since then. But somebody handed me an article from the legal newspaper, which I couldn't believe. This DA, Kamala Harris, floated a plan to the police department to not prosecute drug dealers until their third arrest. Now, remember, the police were not big fans of Hallinan. The police command, hearing about this, said, this is crazy. AC Transit, BART, and Samtrans will have to add extra buses and trains to bring all the drug dealers. One said, Captain Cashman said, I believe in catch and release for trout, but not for drug dealers. And it's just what you said. Word travels on the street, so drug dealers hear about this, and they flock to San Francisco, and there's a connection between that kind of rampant drug dealing and turf wars and homicides. That's why that article troubled me so much.
The argument can't be from the district attorney's office that we'll ignore those kinds of crimes because now we'll prosecute only the violent crimes. No. The record is still low. The the prosecution record and conviction record is still low in San Francisco.
The bottom line on that article, by the way, and it appeared in the Daily Journal, a respected legal newspaper in San Francisco, was they'd get better convictions. I think what you have is a DA obsessed with conviction rate, because that's what Hallinan looked bad on that score. But while her conviction rate nominally has gone up, the crime rate's exploded. And if we could talk about the conviction rate for just a second. Yeah. What a conviction rate is, of the cases that you choose to prosecute, how many you win. So if you do easy cases, you get more of them. If you take on tough cases, you're going to get a worse conviction rate. During the 7 years that the last DA was in office, homicide went down every year. In the last 3 years, it's gone up every year. So conviction rate on the surface only means how many are one of the ones you choose, but not just that, it doesn't tell you what the person got. And here's just one example. I wrote about a couple in my op-ed piece. This is a murderer, James McKinnon. This was in a local newspaper. Killed a guy, Mr. Obert, and then dumped the dead man in his own bathtub. He then moved into the victim's apartment for 2 weeks while he spent his checks. Meanwhile, he had a second victim. A 68-year-old man in a wheelchair he was terrorizing and stealing his checks. When I was in the DA's office, we demanded life in prison for McKinnon. Maybe we would have lost, or maybe we would have won. Who knows, because the trial didn't happen. Kamala Harris gave him 6 years in prison and dismissed the case against the guy in the wheelchair. It's all documented here. The victim's family was not even told about that plea bargain. Now, conviction rate, that's 100% conviction, isn't it?
Yes.
But this killer will be on the street in less than 2 years. So you got to look behind those numbers, and I think there's a connection between not going after tough cases, plea bargaining serious murder cases for 6 years and whatnot, and crime going up.
We have had as guest U.S. Attorney Kevin Ryan. We've had Mr.
I was a prosecutor with him in Alameda County, actually.
Well, that's right. And Mr. Delanus from the Police Officers Association. And of course, I was fortunate to do the debate between Mr. Hallinan and Kamala Harris. And everyone points their finger at everyone else. So I think Kamala Harris has said the police reports are poorly written, or even your boss would say that the police reports are poorly written. The police say that the courts are letting the people out in plea bargaining too much. And it goes around in this circle. Where does the buck stop?
Well, you got to stop pointing fingers, and it sounds to me like politicians when they do that. Listen, here's the bottom line fact is, not every police case is perfect. Okay, I'm not here to defend every cop or every case. Having said that, the San Francisco Weekly, Martin Coos wrote a piece earlier this year. In the Hallinan years, in the couple of years that I was the head on homicide, there were far less murder cases, but we charged 50% more cases. So we were biting off tougher cases. And when you have charged murderers, you know what it means? They're in jail. One of the things that Kamala Harris has bragged about is reducing the homicide backlog. Well, you know what that means? There used to be 77 killers in jail. I think that's a good thing. Clearing the backlog meant giving plea bargains to the like of McKinnon and 10 other cases, 20 other cases I could tell you about, which means they're going to be back on the streets again. So every case isn't perfect, but it takes a prosecutor to have some guts to say, I'm going to take on this tough case and at least keep him in jail for 4 or 5 years so he can't kill again. And I'll win some of those, and I'll send the message out on the streets and deterrent effect.
I know you're involved with homicide and so on, but it's bigger than that.
It's much bigger.
It's about violent crimes in San Francisco.
Up 19% in 1 year, Art.
In 1 year, and 40% of the people, according to Gary Delanus, in a poll, I think it was a POA poll, are afraid to go out at night. And so that can't just be the Bayview and Hunters Point where people like to say, well, that's that neighborhood. It's much larger than that. So homicides are important, I agree, and so on. But I can't figure out, from listening to everybody's point of view, how do you correct the situation?
Well, again, I'm not here to point fingers, so I want to talk about very concrete things. That's why I wrote that op-ed piece. I had just had it reading about a 17-year-old kid murdered in the daylight near my house. You know, if you can't go after the murder case, one of the things I did when I was a prosecutor, I worked with a federal state task force where they got together, federal agents, state cops, and prosecutors.
On gang warfare?
Gangs and gang drug warfare.
And you dropped it. You dropped it significantly.
And what we did, here's what we did. We said, and the community knows. You go to the local cops and we go to these meetings. Who are the 10 worst guys in your neighborhood? Maybe you can't prove a murder case, but you can get them for drug dealing. So we'd work up 10 good cases against 10 guys. And in one day, we'd take 10 off the street. You know how it felt the next day in that neighborhood? Big difference. So there are concrete ways working together that you can get the guys off the street. And you go into these tough neighborhoods and they'll tell you who they are. And if you do that, you'll make those neighborhoods safer.
But is it just confined to those neighborhoods?
No, it's worse there.
Yes, it's worse there. So then, how then do you create a climate of lawful street behavior throughout the city, and on Muni or in the subways, downtown in tourist districts, and not just in the areas that have more crime? There's a pervasive lawlessness right now.
I think, and I don't want to micromanage the police department. I respect a lot of cops here and the commanders there, but I think we should rethink a little bit of how we're doing the staffing. I know Supervisor McCreamy and others have talked about adding more cops on foot patrols. They get to know the neighborhoods.
Gary Delanus has said that they can't recruit. Nobody wants to come here because of the over-regulation of the
Here's how I began that op-ed piece, by the way, in the Chronicle, was saying, why are we waiting for 3 police classes? Why don't we laterally hire 100 cops right now and put them in the dangerous neighborhoods?
Why? Well, how would you solve the problem that he brings up, that police officers don't want to come to San Francisco despite the very good salary that begins, not only the cost of living, but more the over-control, the various citizens groups that oversee the police. He claims, not me, but he claims that's discouraging even lateral movement from other police forces.
Well, I'm not an expert in police hiring, so I'm not going to pretend to be. Having said that, we should do whatever we have to get them. This is beyond the point of wondering and asking questions. It should be done now.
Who would support the police and convince a new officer or a person in another department that they have some support in San Francisco. It seems like the mayor and the chief and the district attorney and the citizens complaint group, everyone seems to complain about the police. Why would someone want to move here and take a job here?
You read some of my bio. Part of my bio you might not have read. I was a reserve police officer for 5 years.
Okay.
When I was 18 years old, probably the youngest cop in my small town in Half Moon Bay. Grew up in the city, but then moved down there when I was a kid. San Francisco is an exciting place, I think, for a smart cop to work. There's, I think, very interesting police work to do here, and so maybe other work can be done with that. Maybe other inducements have to be given. All I know is it's such a crisis we can't wait anymore.
But you think if you had to pinpoint, if you did a three-point plan and you look at the various facets of law enforcement, what would you recommend for some real changes over the next year?
The first thing we have to do, the street has to be safe enough so people can walk to school. And whatever neighborhood you live in, it's tough, but if you live in the Bayview or the Western Addition, it's a crisis, it's a scandal, I think. So before you can ask people to come forward as witnesses, their streets have to be safe. So I want 100 extra cops now in those tough neighborhoods, frankly, whatever it costs. Once you do that, I think you bring down the street level of violence, you create confidence in people. You do, secondly, what I talked about, which is targeting the most dangerous guys. If you can't build a murder case, then build a drug dealing case against them and keep them in jail. And then third, you work on bringing forward some of these people as witnesses in murders, and I think you can begin to break it. One way to do it is to use the grand jury. This DA took 2 years to take her first case to the grand jury. That's too long.
Why?
I think the reason is Hallinan was criticized for a low conviction rate, and she used that to some effect in the campaign. If you don't charge a case, a tough case, you can't lose it, can you? And the grand jury might end up charging a case. I prosecuted the San Francisco dog mauling case. We gave them the choice to prosecute it as a manslaughter and murder, and I trusted them.
Gave them the grand jury?
The grand jury, I stood in front of them and said, I want you to do the right thing. There's no judge in that room, no one but the prosecutor and the grand jury, no other lawyer in that room. And I said, here's the instructions for manslaughter. Here it is for murder. You've heard the evidence. Be fair, do the right thing. I left the room 2 hours later. They said, we think it's a murder. We went to Los Angeles, and 12 Los Angelinos agreed. It's going back to the Supreme Court, by the way, this fall to decide if that jury verdict gets upheld, because Judge Warren had tossed it out afterwards. But if you take on tough cases, you're going to win some of them. You're going to send a message to violent people on the street that we're coming after you.
Because that also improves the morale of the police force.
It does.
Because they know that all the work they're doing is going to wind up.
Yeah, every case is not perfect, but just reading the Chronicle in the last year or so, 10 different alleged killers have been arrested by San Francisco police officers to be set free by this DA. How do you think those inspectors feel?
Jim Hammer, thank you for being with us.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. For program schedules, post-production notes, and free streaming video of select interviews, visit our website at www.sfunscripted.com.